nine, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello there, and welcome back to Roz Night. Squeeze the Quo. Thank you very much for being here. As always, thank you to my subscribers, 205. Waddy, woohoo. You're fabulous. You're amazing. I appreciate you. So let's get to business. Down here on my right-hand screen is Chase and Status. I brought this to your attention because, as we know, it is a jungle out there. And I do appreciate jungle, this type, but not out there. The jungle of corruption, basically. So we're going to go over 3 different documents, research papers. The one that I mentioned earlier, which is the going to college and unpacking hazing. We'll definitely go over that. But first, I found 2 more that I would like to skim through or go over. The one is my short, unhappy life as a sorority girl. I've been waiting on it, and I feel it's time to read this. I've been giving a lot of information about hazing because that is on a lot of the news sources that I've been able to find, not so much on sorority, and I'm going to do a whole section on sorority. I've been getting some papers, and it's very eye-opening. And then I finally got this in, which is what I've been waiting to get. Through the library that I got my master's at, and it's come in. And as you can see, it's an oldie but a goodie. And I found it very interesting, very important to go over because I went over this in another video with the violence on campus, interpersonal violence, with Lauren at the University of Utah. And I felt that was important because the University of Idaho, along with a lot of universities, use grant money, which is free government money. And I like to say that because a lot of these small towns like to bitch about government and government handouts and people getting welfare and, their taxpayer dollars are paying for that. Well, guess what? The university's doing it as well. They're getting free grant money. And most of it's off of women's backs, literally and figuratively, because a lot of this was brought upon because of the violence against women. And that's free money. And guess what happened? 3 women were brutally murdered on your campus, on your turf, and you're trying to cover it up. So we'll go over that. And I just kind of went over a little bit, and then I had to look at it a little bit further because I find something's amiss, something's not right. And I could be just not seeing it or not know the right information to figure out what I'm seeing, but this is how I went about doing it. So here is the document. The author is Gus Ramirez. The title is Campus Security Act and Students' Right to Know, which University of Idaho kind of flubbed that up from the jump. The institution is Johnson County Community College, Overland Park, Kansas. The publication date is November 14th, 1991. And it's a viewpoints for opinion, position papers, essays, guides. And the descriptors are community colleges, compliance, legal, crime, crime prevention, educational legislation, federal legislation, higher education, law enforcement, school responsibility, school safety, school security, victims of crime. Identifiers are Student Right to Know and Campus Security Act. So this is the abstract. So in November of 1990, the Students' Right to Know and Campus Security Act became law, requiring all post-secondary institutions that receive federal student aid to collect campus crime statistics and make timely reports to the campus community on crimes that are considered a threat to other students and other employees. The law also requires that institutions distribute an annual crime and security policies report to all current students and employees and make the report available to prospective students and employees. College and university units involved in complying with the law are financial aid, student affairs, Greek life, off-campus student organizations, admissions, personnel, housing, residence life, public information, legal counsel, security, police, athletics, and register office. Each unit has separate reporting responsibilities. Crimes to be reported include murder, rape, robbery, aggravated assault, burglary, motor vehicle theft, and hate crimes. Arrests to be reported include liquor law violations, drug abuse violations, and weapons possessions. Crime and arrest statistics compiled for the school year must be reported by September 1st, 1991. Currently, crimes are reported on a hierarchy basis, with only the most significant crime reported during a single incident. Using the National Incident-Based Reporting System, the NIMBRS, which we went over in the FBI audit, all of the crimes must be committed in a single incident are reported. Another possible change in crime statistics reporting may come with the passage of proposed amendment S.15, the Violation Against Women Act of 19. You see how that's purposefully done, which would add rape or sexual assault to the list of crimes reported, considerations in developing a campus law enforcement, you think? Record-keeping system are suggested, and 6 resource lists are attached. So I had to look up the Violence Against Women Act and how this is purposefully not seen. So I went ahead and right here is the justice.gov, the history of the Office of Violence Against Women. Congress passed the VAWA in 1994 in recognition of the severity of crimes associated with domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking. Created in 1995, OVW ministers financial and technical assistance to communities across the country that are developing programs, policies, and practices aimed at ending domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking. Congress reauthorized VAWA in 2005, 2013, and 2022. So it's formula-based, discretionary grant programs established under the VAWA and subsequent legislation. The 4 formula programs are STOP, Services, Training, Officers, Prosecutors, SASP, Sexual Assault Service Program, state coalitions, and tribal coalitions. The 15 discretionary programs work to support survivors and hold offenders accountable through promoting a coordinated community response. We award funding to local, state, and tribal governments, courts, nonprofit organizations, community-based organizations, secondary schools, institutions of higher education, and state and tribal coalitions. OVW grants help develop effective responses to violence against women through activities that include direct services, crisis intervention, transitional housing, legal assistance to survivors, court improvements, and training for law enforcement and courts. Well, I don't know if the training for law enforcement has been effective at the University of Idaho. From what we were able to see, they were more worried about the noise complaints than the actual Greek life, Greek council. They knew it was an off-campus security home or off-campus Greek house, sorority house. That should have alerted them that something's going on, that 3 of the girls that are living in there are no longer sorority, and those 2 girls that are living there are sorority, along with Ethan's was dating Xana, so he's a threat in the fact that he is still a fraternity in the fraternity, and he is with a female who is no longer in a sorority. So let's see here. Let's see the organizational chart. So here we see the Office on Violence Against Women. So you have the National Advisory Committee on Violence Against Women, Section 904, Violence Against Women in Indian Country Task Force, Director, Principal Duty, Deputy Director for Tribal Affairs, Administration, Budget and Financial Management, Grant Development Management, Legal Counsel, and Policy and Communication Evaluation. And this was signed and approved by Eric H. Holder Jr., Attorney General, May 16th, 2013. Okay. And here's some facts. So let's see here. About the Office on Violence Against Women. The Office of Violence Against Women, the OVW, was created to implement the Violence Against Women Act and subsequent legislation. So this provides financial and technical assistance to communities to help them create programs, policies, and practices to end sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking. In 2002, OVW became a permanent part of the Department of Justice with a director who is appointed by the President and confirmed by the Senate. A coordinated community response requires a coordinated community response to sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking. The law asks jurisdictions to bring together stakeholders from diverse backgrounds to share information and use their distinct roles to improve community responses to violence against women. So let's see here. So the grants that are available, and it was established in 1995 and was awarded $6 billion in grants in 1995. $6 billion in grants and cooperative agreements, and has launched a multifaceted approach to implementing the VAWA. Now, I find this interesting because University of Idaho does receive this grant money. It's under the Clery Act, which we'll get into a little bit further. And I find this very amusing because, as they say, it's a very small town. It's close-knit. And I've heard them talk. You know what they like to say? And I've seen it in some of their Reddits as well about Idaho in general. They hate government. They want government to stay out of it. But you know what? They have no problem receiving grant money to help protect women. That is welfare money, if you want to put it that way. That's free money from the government. Free money. Our tax-paying dollars are going against those welfare recipients who are going to McDonald's and buying lobsters and steaks. Well, guess what? Your university is getting millions of dollars to protect women, and guess what happened on your turf? 3 of them got slaughtered. 3 of them got slaughtered on your turf, and you try to hide it. Do you know why you try to hide? How you try to hide it? Because Ethan's parents were the ones to alert the nation. And text messages or vandal alerts didn't come out until hours and hours afterwards. So right there, you're taking that free, delicious, beautiful thousands and thousands of dollars of grant money. Free money to protect. And you did not at all. You welfare university. So the 4 focus areas which we have gone through. Okay? Let's go back. Let's see from current slide. Okay. Now, I'm going to move this back over here. Next page. 'Cause this gets better. It gets better. And as I said, I skimmed through this. So the speech presented was the National Council of Community College Business Officials in Asheville, North Carolina, November 14th, 1991. Okay. The U.S. Department of Education. This document has been reproduced as received from the person or organization originating at. Minor changes have been made and to improve production quality. And points of view or opinions stated on this document do not necessarily, okay, blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah, blah. All right, so we have here Campus Security Act, Students' Right to Know, Introduction, Personal, each member, department, position, frustration. I had the opportunity last month to attend a one-day workshop on campus safety and security at the University of Texas in Arlington. The workshop was sponsored by IACLEA and NACAS. Mr. Robert Miller, Director of Public Safety at Furman University, Greenville, South Carolina, was the guest speaker. Robert has done a considerable amount of research into the new regulations, and with the cooperation of several universities and agencies, he has compiled copies of safety programs and policies that are being used by colleges and universities around the country. Robert was kind enough to provide me with this information, and we have put together a booklet for your use. At the workshop this afternoon, we will distribute the booklets to those who would like to have one. Background on regulations. We are here today to talk about the new regulations relating to crime on our campuses. A recent comment made in a newsletter from IACLA stated that crime on America's college and universities, especially violent crimes, has been described as one of the best kept secrets in modern times. As we all know, there have been numerous lawsuits filed against colleges and universities with large settlements involved. These suits were brought about due to several reasons. As an example, in 1983, in the Mullins versus Pine Manor College, the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts found the college liable for the rape of a student who was abducted from her dorm, according to the court. The college has a duty to provide security for its students. The evidence was sufficient to sustain the college was negligent in performing that duty, and that the negligence was the proximate cause of the student's injury. Just to give you an idea what colleges and universities can be sued for: failure to provide reasonable security. Okay. Insufficient training of personnel. Okay. Inadequate lighting. What did we talk about that house and those streets? Yes, it's an off-campus home, but it's still on campus. It's a sorority house. It was dubbed as a sorority house. It was dubbed as a Greek house. So therefore, it is university. It is needed for the basic safety and security, which they like to talk about. They like to preach it. Failure to maintain proper landscaping, which a lot of landscaping is going on around there. Failure to limit access, insufficient security staff. Failure to perform a duty. A couple of examples might be failure to lock a building on schedule, insufficient investigation into an accident. Campus crimes have received a considerable amount of attention in the media and Congress. The incident that has had the greatest impact on both private and state universities was at Lee University in Pennsylvania in 1986. Janine Ann Cleary, a 19-year-old student, was beaten, sexually assaulted. Let me say, as with all my other videos, explicit and illicit language will be used. Mr. Rogers, make the mentionable manageable. Make the manageable mentionable. Moving on. Janine Ann Cleary, a 19-year-old student, was beaten, sexually assaulted, and strangled after she came upon Joseph Henry, also a student, who was burglarizing her room. The doors to her dorm had automatic locks and door closures. However, someone had propped the door open the night of the incident. Henry, whom school officials said had a record of disciplinary problems, was later convicted of murder and was sentenced to death. Through the efforts of Mr. and Mrs. Howard Cleary, legislation was passed in Pennsylvania that required all state institutions of higher education in the Commonwealth, public or private, to report campus crime statistics to the Pennsylvania State Police and to provide information on crime rates, selected security policies, and procedures to all students and employees and to all applicants for enrollment or employment. Where is Brian Koberger from? Okay. Since the passage of this legislation, there have been several changes made within the state of Pennsylvania, and also several other states have passed similar legislation, but as you know, each state varied considerably. In November of 1990, President Bush signed into law, Public Law 101-542, the Students' Right to Know and Campus Security Act. This law applies to all institutions of post-secondary education that receive federal student aid. That is University of Idaho. They always tie everything to money to get everyone to comply. Well, what's happening because they're not complying? They're getting the money, but they're not complying. Compliance timetable, August 1st, 1991. Each institution must begin collecting information concerning campus statistics and campus security policies. Begin making timely reports to the campus community on crimes that are reported to campus security or local law enforcement agencies and are considered to be a threat to other students and employees in a manner which will aid in prevention of similar occurrences. September 1st, 1992. Each institution must publish and distribute to all current students, and employees an annual report of campus security policies and crime statistics, which, you know, they did mention that every single time with those noise complaints about underage drinking. Oh, you spoke to Officer Bubba about underage drinking. Yes, they got that under effect. It's like they focused on one, but not the rest. You have to focus on all of them. Publish and distribute to all current students and employees. We provide the same report to any applicant for employment. For the purpose of the Act, the campus is defined as any building or property owned or controlled by the institution of higher education within the same reasonable contagious area and used by the institution in direct support of or related to educational purposes, or any building or property owned or controlled by student organizations recognized by the institution. So there you go. And in the beginning, they tried to almost wedge in and put it like, well, it was an off-campus home. It was an off-campus home. It was an off-campus home. To make it sound like it didn't happen on campus. Well, guess what? It is. Even though it's off-campus, technically, it is on Greek Row. It is an off-campus sorority home. It's a Greek home. So, nice try. Disclosure of security policies, and that tells you they're trying to hide it. When they are using language to try to distance themselves from the incident that's within their close, tight-knit community, they are trying to try to get away from their responsibilities, even though they're getting the free government money. The law requires that security provide in their reports a policy reporting criminal actions, security, explanation of the operations, campus law enforcement, security department. Now, someone in my comments mentioned that Kaylee or one of the girls, or several of the girls, made a civil service complaint against the police for what they were doing, because they were harassing them. So I would be interested to know if there's anything in here that shows, because that's almost like a whistleblower. And there are whistleblower acts to protect people for alerting an organization that there is corruption going on within their organization that they're working for or they're a part of. And there are safety measures out there for people to be protected when they go against the quo, they go against the grain, because they were being harassed. And they have whistleblower for reasons, because there's retaliation because of that. So if that really happened, that is huge, because that says that they knew what was going on. And instead of addressing the problem, they murder them, whomever, whatever. Just like with the Lauren McCluskey in University of Utah, she put up a restraining order against the person who was harassing her, stalking her. And someone within that campus or within that police department told him that she did that, which escalated it. And with that last stalking video about doing the restraining order, well, they found that it's not really effective because it escalates it. Well, maybe it's because people are telling the freaking perpetrator that they're getting a restraining order on them. And they're not enforcing it. Enforcing it meaning that when they are breaking their restraining order grounds of how many feet they cannot be on there, they need to enforce that every single time. Every single time. Okay, a policy on alcohol possession, use and sale, as well as enforcement and educational efforts, and policy statements on illegal drug possession, use and sale, and education programming. Okay, well, we are hearing about how it's a party house, drugs were involved, It is 2023, almost 2024. Drugs have been an issue within our country forever. They like to say there was a war on it. Well, if there is a war on it, then how is it that this is still going on? And that it's almost, I want to say like it's becoming complacent on it somewhat. Because we know who's dealing the drugs. We know who is bringing the drugs in. We know they are allowing it to come in. So that rhetoric is getting kind of stale. The Act not only places additional requirements on security, it also affects specific administrative units within the college organizational structure. Following is a list of units that will be required to comply with this. Financial aid, student affairs, Greek affairs, campus student organizations, students residing at recognized off-campus organizations, authorities as well as local police, admissions, personnel, housing, resident life. Now, something was interesting that once this happened, they had the press conference and they said something really odd, like we're going to make sure that everything's locked on campus and that there's going to be someone in the buildings for any needs and for extra safety. That wasn't already there. I mean, I went to college once back in the day in the 90s, late 90s, and it was a small college. And in our building, it was an all girls, which I chose. And there was all girls building, all males, and then there was a mix, a co-ed. I chose to be in the all girls because, it gets to be too much at times. And there was always someone at the front desk when you walked in to make sure everything was kosher. 24/7. And it was locked. So I don't understand how in 2023 or 2022 that they're saying this, that they're going to have that. That should be a given. That no matter how safe you think it is, you still need to have it. It needs to be shown to people that there's safety here. We're securing places, because the corrupt will definitely scope it out and see where you're slipping. Public information, in reports, legal counsel. Note crime prevention to warnings to the campus community, security police, negotiation with local police to obtain information concerning crimes which are reported at off-campus student organizations, which are not included in the institution's annual report, and other off-campus crimes which may be considered to pose a threat to students and employees and are therefore subject to the timely notice crime prevention provision of this act. So if you are aware that that house was a party house and drugs were coming in and out, then why wasn't it addressed? Why wasn't it addressed at all? Because it got to the point where it escalated to this. It escalated to a point where 4 people were fucking murdered, massacred in Moscow, Idaho, on the university turf, with cops all around coordinating. It escalated to that point. We saw it first happen August 16th with the first noise complaint by Rosendahl. That was them carousing. That was them stalking, antagonizing, letting them know that we are listening and we are watching. Cops are coming after you in that house, with roommates inside there escalating it as well by blasting the big JBL knowingly and willingly after they were warned. Even the one cop said, the blonde gal and that guy, is that your roommate? Because they're the ones. And Xana, sticks up for her. So they're aware. They're aware, and they probably didn't follow through. Obviously they didn't follow through because, or if they did follow through and someone blocked it because it's so corrupt. They have little devils everywhere, little demons and little devils everywhere, putting their hands in things, getting that government money and getting some side money. Athletic department, registrar's office. The law was affected to some extent the campus security programs of every post-secondary institutions in the nation. Those institutions that have done nothing in the way of documenting and reporting criminal offenses will be required to develop a record-keeping system, crime prevention programs which will ensure that students and other members of the campus community receive timely notice of incidents which may pose a risk to their safety will need to be implemented. Hello, University of Idaho, when this happened. That vandal alert didn't go off, I want to say, until 2 o'clock? The families didn't know until 3 or 4? Heck, the nation didn't know until a day or 2 later. Then they came out afterwards and said something and did a press conference. And they admitted it. We should have been here earlier, but here we are. Oh my gosh. Are you fucking kidding me? Sorry, we were just... should have been here, but... please. Getting that free government money. And that's how you act? Colleges and universities that currently have systems in place will need to review and revise them to ensure they are meeting all of the requirements. So you got to do some work. Sorry, you got to do some actual work to get that free money, that free government money. One thing nice about the new regulations is they are leaving the reporting formats we use up to us, as long as all the requirements are met. So, reporting requirements again: murder, rape, robbery, aggravated assault, burglary, motor vehicle theft, hate crimes. Arrest to be reported, liquor law, drug abuse, weapons possessions. Do it within the school year. The law does not require educational institutions to participate in the UCR program. However, it does use the same definitions: murder and non-negligent manslaughter, the willful, non-negligent killing of one human being by another, forcible rape, robbery, aggravated assault, burglary, motor vehicle. Okay, we went through all this. And then the hierarchy rule. I don't like this hierarchy rule. How about just use proper priority, top priority: murder, rape, aggravated assault, burglary, larceny, theft. Not hierarchy, because that's when you start putting in weird definitions around it and weird terms around it by people who don't know what's going on. Under this rule, any incident in which a burglary entered a resident hall room, raped the occupant, stole cash, and started a fire, oh my God, an effort to destroy evidence would be reported as a single offense. Rape. Yeah, because that was the underlying cause of the whole fucking thing. And that's funny how when this first started, they said it was burglary was the first offense. And then no sexual assaults, but then 4 homicides, a mass murder. Handling unfounded crime reports. Hate crime statistics. Let's see here. Potential impact of the amendment proposed, the Violence Against Women Act of 1991, was introduced on January 14th by Senator John Biden. Contains a section entitled Safe Campuses for Women. One of the provisions of this section would amend the Crime Awareness and Campus Security Act of 1990. Okay, there we go. So it's the Campus Act and Security is of 1990, but then the Violence Against Women was 1994. To modify the list of crime statistics which must be included in an institution's annual report to include rape or sexual assault. Okay, let's see here. So you get the picture. How the University of Idaho, who receives that free government money, did not follow these acts, these provisions, these protocols that they were supposed to do when this happened. There was no due diligence. There was no proactivity. There was no proper training of the local police department or even campus police. Where's the campus police? What? Where are the campus police? You have campus security, but it sounds like you need some campus police. Where are the campus police? Why are you dumping it to MPD, who clearly do not want to be there, who clearly are... They're being there for a reason, but it's not the reason that we are thought that they were there for. They had their reasons to be there for these noise complaints. Letting them know, they were puffing out their chests, letting them know who was in charge, who was large and in charge. So let's do, and I'll put that in my descriptions if you want to read that. Let's do the sorority. Excuse me. Happy Wednesday, hump day. Start the slideshow. We'll start it from the beginning. I'm drinking a little of my hot apple cider. Okay. All right, so this is my short, unhappy life as a sorority girl. And this is written by Laura Wright. The abstract. Wright discusses her short experience of being a sorority girl and discusses the 2 incidents that persuaded her to leave sorority life. Even though colleges are loath to abandon the Greek system, no matter its boorish behavior or hazing incidents, one can maintain one's dignity and make the choice to walk away, which is what Kaylee, Maddie, and Xana did. To preserve their dignity, they walked away. By Laura Wright. Recently, the news media reported on a fraternity hazing incident at the University of Tennessee, in which a student was taken to the University Medical Center in critical condition with a blood alcohol level of 0.4%, the result of an alleged alcohol enema. Oh my God. Oh my God. What is going on? According to a Knoxville police spokesman, upon extensive questioning, it is believed that members of the fraternity were using rubber tubing inserted into their rectums as a conduit for alcohol, as the abundance of capillaries. Okay, first of all, a police spokesperson said this? I don't think so. That is way too highbrow for them. But let me go. Upon extensive questioning, and that's why I'm laughing. Upon extensive questioning, it is believed that members of the fraternity were using rubber tubing inserted into their rectums as a conduit for alcohol, as the abundance of capillaries and blood vessels present greatly heightens the level and speed of the alcohol entering the bloodstream as it bypasses the filtering by the liver and your, don't forget your large and small intestines as well. Okay. Members of the Pi Kappa Alpha chapter deny that that was the cause because, well, I imagine that the fear of being charged with violating one's brothers with rubber tubing and booze is probably more terrifying than just about anything else those guys can think of. I mean, people might think they're gay, never mind sadist, and now the hospitalized student is denying it as well, despite physical evidence to the contrary. And that's when adults have to step up and and advocate. Of course he's going to deny. He's fucking terrified and he's embarrassed and he's under a lot of shame. He's probably not thinking correctly. So that's when advocates need to come in and really talk to them. Imano, about what the hell's going on. Have some support for these people who are being victimized. Allegations of brutal behavior by fraternities are nothing new. I was not surprised by a 2005 incident in which a University of Texas fraternity pledge, found dead after a night of partying, was covered in homophobic slurs. Are you fucking kidding me? And I haven't been surprised by the numerous incidents of fraternity parties where whites show up in blackface. What the fuck? 2005? Or by the misogyny that is fostered by fraternities and tactically condoned by the colleges that perpetrate their existence. Only when racist, sexist, and homophobic behavior endangers a life are penalties enforced, because of it's a hate crime, and those, embarrassing though they may be, are mere wrist slaps for men who graduate and become upstanding members of society. I know. Love, am related to, care about, and educate plenty of amazing people who participate and thrive in Greek life and who exemplify all that's good about humanity. The problem isn't the individuals, but the operating principle of Greek organizations that if you're in, then you're better than all those schmucks who weren't given a bid. If you're a woman in a sorority, that means that you're prettier and more charming. If you're a man in a fraternity, then you are an alpha male, the epitome of all that is lionized. Well, before you call me out on some feminazi out to demonize the Greek system, know that I was one of its members, a sister in a sorority for 1 year. I joined because my high school friends with whom I went to college wanted me to. It was weird to feel popular and wanted because I had never been either. But even when I was rushing, and later when I pledged, I knew that it wasn't for me. I didn't want to exclude the friends I had made during my first year. Of college. And I most certainly didn't want to have to live as well requiesced for sorority members in Greek housing, but thought that I would get used to things. I was wrong. I desistered after 2 incidents. First, I sat on the other side of a rush and listened as these women with whom I linked my fate rated potential pledges based upon their appearance, their past boyfriends, and their connections with current sisters. I got yelled at for refusing to take part, and I gathered my notebooks and walked right out of the room. I got in trouble for that, too. I was reprimanded by my sorority's president for my unsisterly behavior. Then I was nearly raped by a frat boy, some guy whose name I don't even remember now, but whom I took to a dance out in the middle of nowhere because my sisters let me know, unequivocally, that the guy I wanted to take wasn't in a frat, would not be an acceptable date. Okay, so there you go. So they do have, you have to date within the Greek system. You can't be a Montague and a Capulet. You have to be all Montague or all Capulet. I was able to fight the frat boy off only because he was falling down drunk and I was sober. The next day, he trash-talked me. It was like something out of a movie. And I got reprimanded by my sisters for not putting out. Oh my God, at that point, I was done. Good for you. Joining a sorority may very well be the sole thing in my life that I unequivocally regret. When I desistered, I was treated like a leper by women who had once vowed undenying love to me. I was suddenly like a person at once pitiable and grotesque. Every time I saw one of my former sisters, I received a heartfelt, "How are you?" But I never once regretted leaving. Colleges seem disinclined to ever abandon the embarrassing anachronisms that is the Greek system. But the good news is that we can all be individuals and walk away. Laura Wright is an associate professor of English at Western Carolina University. Okay. So that's a little something. This came out October 22nd, 2012. So she gave a little information about her short stint as being a sorority girl, which I'm going to read. I've got a few research articles on sorority life and some personal articles as well about how these sorority sisters act. Moving on, we'll get to going to college, and this is about basically being hazed going into the Greek system. So this is Group Dynamics Theory, Research, and Practice. This was copyrighted in 2005 by the Educational Publication Foundation. Going to College and Unpacking Hazing, a functional approach to decrypting initiation practices among undergrads. And this is the researchers at Colgate University. Initiation practices likely support group functioning by promoting group-relevant skills and attitudes, reinforcing statuses, hierarchies, and stimulating cognitive, behavioral, and affective forms of social dependency. So this is like a cognitive analysis of how these systems work. Almost how do cults work? How do organized crimes work? How do gangs work? How all of that works. And this is what they do to implement these certain actions by knowing the underlying causes of how people form attachments. So this gets into it. This gets into it into another level. It gets a little bit deeper. And effective forms of social dependency. In field tests of these propositions, 269 undergrads from same gender organizations rated their initiation experiences. As predicted, athletes reported relatively more physical challenge and pain, whereas members of Greek letter organizations reported more social deviance and embarrassment. Hierarchy was positively associated with initiations featuring social deviance, but unexpectedly negatively related to physically and psychologically harsh initiations. Harsh treatment and fun independently predicted group identity. Laboratory experiments on male and female undergrads found that discomforting inductions increased social dependency on group opinion and, for women, increased additional forms of dependency, proximity to induction agents, and negative mood when left alone. The results across studies suggested that hazing taskmasters are 3. Schooling skills and attitudes, conveying hierarchy, and promoting social dependency. And so many of us have asked ourselves, why did Kaylee go to that sorority Betty Ball after she was out of the sorority? Why did she choose to go ahead and be the +1 with Dylan at that Betty Ball, the Pi Phi party? Many people are asking, like, you're out of the sorority. Why did you go back? Why did she go back? And if you recall what her mom had said, Christy, that she was hemming and hawing, like she was fighting her gut instinct, which was she should not have gone. I'm sure her gut told her not to go, but she went anyways because she wanted to be with Maddie and show her car. And she was ready to leave, and it was maybe her last goodbye before she would see her again for a while after she moved away to Texas and went over to Europe. Like she was ready to start her life. And she was contemplating that, of even going there. And I have a horrible feeling her gut was telling her not to go, and she went against it. And that's what they tell you. Do not go against your gut instinct. If your gut is telling you, listen to it, listen to your body. I tell everyone who I come in contact with in my professional field, as a licensed medical professional, listen to your gut, listen to your body. Start listening to it. It is telling you things. Listen. You do your body good. You do yourself good. Moving forward. If those above love ritual, then the common people will be easy to manage. Woo! Confucius. 551 to 479 BCE. If those above love ritual, then the common people will be easy to manage. The chain of motivational, cognitive, and social processes that bind individuals to collections of others is forged early in life. Infants and young children inherently form affectional bonds and seek proximity with those who become familiar to them. They need to belong burgeons, fueling a desire for interpersonal attachments that older children, adolescents, and adults may satisfy through group membership. A cognitive proclivity to distinguish in groups from other groups and to self-categorize transforms individual identity into in-group social identity. Striving to belong to a particular group, especially during ritualized initiations, may result in the justification of that effort, thereby inoculating individuals against any dissonant cognitions they may harbor concerning the consequences of group membership. These linkages of motivational, cognitive, and social elements prepare individuals to seek group affiliations and adapt social identities throughout their lifetime. Affiliation and identification with a group and its leader cultivate feelings of security, especially under conditions of uncertainty or threat. For this reason, group leaders who are perceived as powerful and influential in managing threat are likely to enjoy memberships with relatively strong collective identities. Theoretically, it matters little where the threat originates. In humans and other primates, feelings of threat may direct affiliative behavior and affectional bonds toward those suffering the same fate or even toward the agents of the threat. Therefore, events simulating threat may be used to trigger the psychological processes that connect individuals to groups and to their leaders. At times when threat is low, groups and their leaders may instill threat in potential members by invoking perceived enemies, or perhaps by staging initiation rituals that activate feelings of threat. Contrived threats are likely to empower leaders and groups by stimulating the kinds of attitudes, social perceptions, and affiliative bonds that breed group identity and inspire obedience and devotions among new members of face-to-face groups. Processes such as these may be unleashed among constitutions as large as nations or as small as universities and social clubs. The premise of our research was that threatening initiation practices such as hazing rituals function to support and maintain groups in at least 3 ways: by promoting group relevant skills and attitudes, by reinforcing the group's status hierarchy, and by stimulating cognitive, behavioral, and affective forms of social dependency in group members. Field and laboratory research probed these propositions in samples of college students. The rationale for these studies is articulated next, and then the studies are described. So there you go. It is systematically done to keep these groups together. And when I noticed with the amount of hazing and death that was going on at the University of Idaho and at Washington State University, it was almost as if there was a challenge amongst fraternities. If you catch my drift, like there's almost like a sick competition of sorts. Initiations as contrived threat. Preliminary welcoming receptions designed to attract new group members typically entail mildly enjoyable social experiences, such as informal, conversational gatherings surrounding parties or dinners. However, the character of events often changes after these early meetings, consistent with the foot in the door technique. That is, initial requirements to attend group events may consist of simple efforts that are only mildly arousing, such as turning out in particular attire for an occasion, spending time engaged in prescribed social exchanges with group members, or waiting for extended periods of time before being interviewed by a representative of the group. Initial compliance with low-cost efforts like these make subsequent costlier forms of compliance more likely. Subsequent initiation events invite increasingly more effort and may ultimately require newcomers to endure various types of discomfort and threat. For example, cleaning up after parties is a common assignment given to newcomers, and it can become ritualized into particularly degrading forms. In some cases, pledges clean up garbage, vomit, and broken glass in the aftermath of nights of binge drinking using bare hands and wearing uniforms that they are not allowed to wash from party to party. Yet the heightened negativity of the experience is apparently transformed as devotion to the collective. Oh my God. Case studies reveal that a variety of initiation practices characterize groups with highly cohesive and intensely loyal membership. From what is known about real-world groups, initiation and indoctrination protocols are orchestrated so as to stimulate sequences of emotional, perpetual, and cognitive experiences over time. Initiations may include activities perceived to be fun and rewarding, physically and emotionally demanding, embarrassing, socially deviant, degrading, painful, and sometimes dangerous or brutal. The activities designed for newcomers typically adhere to highly prescribed protocols defined by group traditions. Established group members may be given specialized roles such as pledge master and charged with maintaining the integrity of initiation protocols. Leaders and group members commonly subscribe to the belief that newcomers should undergo induction procedures resembling those they experienced. Initiations are thought to produce better group members. It is not unusual for initiants to perceive induction activities as fun and rewarding, and initiation practices may, in fact, be fun. However, there is also evidence that participants cognitively skew discomforting initiation experiences in a way that make them more enjoyable than they actually were. And this kind of goes into the haze or not to haze video that I did, the student legacy, or the student, the fool, and legacy, how those three fall into those three categories, on how they kind of choose their role, or how their role is within their fraternity, and how they kind of have a perception of what it should be like, or what it means to be, or how it should be. So this kind of encompasses that as well. In some cases, the initiation activities new members endure clearly induce threat by incorporating physical challenge or pain. For example, athletic teams and gang members have been known to ritualistically paddle incoming members. These episodes at times degenerate into beatings or sexual assault. Jesus. Pledges to Greek letter organizations may submit to ingesting concoctions meant to induce nausea. In some instances, pledges have choked to death. Pledges may be directed to wait for hours in dark, cold, uncomfortable places, or to maintain painful physical positions for extended periods of time. So, okay. Let's see. That reminds me of the 2005 Matthew, I believe his name was, at the University of Chico, how it was 3 days long and they had to be in that basement that was cold and uncomfortable, and he ended up having a seizure and died. They drank way too much water, which caused his body to seize up. Your body can only handle so much water, and you get fluid overload is what it's called, and you need like some major diuretics to help get that extra water out, to get out of that free space. And the fact that they're doing this, I'm gonna leave it right there. Because how do these fraternities get these ideas to do this? Where does that come from? I'm sure they didn't think of that on their own. They may be charged with the exhausting task of painting ceilings in the fraternity house all night long. Branding with lit cigarettes has been practiced as an initiation ritual in some college fraternities and sororities. College campuses are but one setting in which newcomers to groups may face physical extremes. Canadian Air Force initiates perform demeaning tasks, binge drinking, and submit to intense, painful physical activity. During blood pinning, weird, initiations, U.S. Marine paratrooper trainees earning gold wing pins had them slammed and punched into their bodies by fellow Marines. New cult members have been subjected to inadequate diets while performing repetitive tasks requiring physical endurance. On campus or off, the threat provoked by these types of experiences combines the physical and psychological consequences of submitting to effortful, painful, or self-injurious behavior. Having endured it, individuals may find the consequence of such physical harsh treatment to entail feelings of mastery over the challenge. Sick. Other types of threatening inductions feature social deviance, embarrassment, or humiliation. This is so very unfortunate. This is so sad. For instance, initiation rituals in some fraternity houses include lard sliding, where pledges slather their bodies with lard and slide along the floor. Initiates may be assigned to while away hours concocting original nicknames for fellow recruits that have secret shared meanings. New members may be asked to reveal personally embarrassing information and to memorize and keep secret special songs and histories meant to distinguish the group from their large society. Okay, well, that's okay. That's good, clean, fun nicknames if it's done in a way that's team building. but I have a feeling it's not. Telling and keeping secrets is an effective way to establish social bonds between unfamiliar individuals. Initiates to all female organizations may be assigned to sing bawdy songs in front of all male groups. In some sororities, pledges disrobe and have areas of body fat identified and circled with markers while being observed by fellow recruits and group leaders and members. Binge drinking and cigar smoking, sexual conquests, assignments, performing tedious tasks, and running fool's errands are socially deviant, silly, embarrassing, or demeaning activities characterizing the initiates of many groups. Though not always physically demanding, initiation activities such as these harness the power of effortful engagement in norm violation to create arousal and distress, thereby inducing threat of a social nature. At the same time, these practices seem geared toward creating and elaborating distinctions between the in-group and normative groups. To summarize, initiations compromising physically and psychologically hardships may be used to induce arousal and threat in initiates. These conditions leave individuals more susceptible to group influence and indoctrination. Man, oh man, this is intense. But beyond that, certain types of initiation activities seem orchestrated to achieve particular effects. Experiencing physical extremes may train initiates to withstand physical duress. Engaging in social deviance may primarily function to etch distinction between the in-group and normative groups in the minds and emotions of initiates. Maltreatment may elicit cognitive, behavioral, and emotional symptoms of social dependency. From a functional perspective, different types of initiation experiences seem designed to preserve group features and cultivate group allegiance in particular ways. So it's a total mindfuck. Initiations cultivate group-relevant skills and attitudes. We tested the proposition that initiation practices preserve critical features of group life by unpacking the initiation practices of college athletic teams, sororities, and fraternities in hopes of identifying basic elements. We reasoned that physical challenges would predominate the induction practices of athletic groups, whereas activities highlighting social deviance and therefore social distinctiveness would characterize the initiations of groups dedicated to creating exclusive social networks, such as Greek-lettered organizations. On the basis of a functional perspectives, athletes were predicted to report relatively greater degrees of physical duress in their initiations than were members of Greek-letter organizations. Members of Greek-letter organizations were expected to report initiation activities entailing more social deviance than were members of athletic groups. Initiations reinforce group hierarchy. A second function of initiations may be to attune new members to the group's hierarchical structure. Initiations provide early opportunities for group leaders to establish power over newcomers to the organization. Getting recruits to follow induction protocols essentially trains them to comply with the group's authority structure. Groups characterized by relatively complex vertical formalized hierarchies maintain greater social distances between leaders and new members than do groups with flatter, informal hierarchies. Therefore, hierarchical groups were expected to rely on the long psychological reach of stressful initiations as a means of establishing social control more than were groups with less hierarchy. So that's why they kept almost like elevating those initiation practices to that point where it became almost like a life. It's becoming life or death. And like the one with Michael Den running across a frozen field with 30-pound sandbags, and they said that he was singled out. He was definitely targeted, and it caused him to die. So was that like a group thing to think of choosing him? Was it a group thing of the sororities to choose the 3 outcasts in their mind that left them? They left their group. They wanted to punish them for that and send a message to everyone else that when you join Greek, you have to stay Greek. We predicted that members of groups with more structured hierarchies, operationally defined by greater role diversity and greater power differences between leaders and new members, would report more severe initiation practices and more frequent engagement in initiating activities than groups with less hierarchy. Initiation stimulates social dependency. Initiations also function to promote cognitive, behavioral, and affective forms of social dependency among group members. But what psychological mechanisms explain why initiation experiences that induce threat, duress, or discomfort rally rather than discourage the loyalties of those who endure them? One possibility stems from attachment theory. For a decade or so, researchers have noted parallels between the attachment processes, characteristics of parent-infant bonds, and those underlying adult bonds. More recently, attachment theory has been applied to individual attachments to groups. Smith and his colleagues noted, for example, that the self-regulatory processes that tie individuals to one another resemble those that bind individuals to groups. Argued that because the biosocial emotional system for human attachment is evolutionarily old and ingrained in human nature, it could have been co-adapted to configure individual relationships with collectives as well as with other individuals, which I demonstrated in the Stanford prison experiment. It's an old, ingrained, and it's in their human nature. Are we stuck? And those who are aware of that, use that. Those who are aware of this, use it to gain. Using similar thinking, we propose that a unique aspect of the attachment system, maltreatment effects, applies to human connections with groups and may cast light on how group initiations function to promote behavioral, cognitive, and affective forms of social dependency. Maltreatment effects describe the phenomenon whereby harsh conditions trigger goal-directed responses in organisms seeking refuge from the duress. Hence, the infant seeks out a caregiver when hungry, fearful, tired, or in pain. Under mundane circumstances, manifesting such social dependencies would be adaptive, contributing fitness to both caregivers, and offspring. However, the response can be elicited even when the caregiver is the source of the discomfort. That is, social dependency may be directed toward the very agent of the mistreatment. Maltreatment effects have been investigated in a variety of non-human species, including monkeys, dogs, sheep, and chickens. In one study, puppies were either indulged or alternatively indulged and punished by their human handler. When tested for attachment to him, puppies that were both indulged and punished showed more than twice the desire to maintain close proximity to their handler than did the indulged group of puppies. The stimulation of abuse can be potent. Monkeys often form stronger bonds with periodically abusive agents than with non-abusive agents. The implications of maltreatment effects for human attachments to groups are important. Individuals who undergo mental and physical duress can become dependent on and even attached to those inflicting the treatment, especially when a clear power differential is present and alternative social options are unavailable. So when they left the sorority, they made their lives a living hell. They made it difficult, purposefully. From a functional perspective, and how would not a university be aware of this? You're a freaking educational institution. From a functional perspective, treatment that includes punishment as well as reward may be most effective in creating social dependency on its agents. Anecdotal evidence seems to support the idea that severe treatment sometimes stimulates social bonds in humans. The Stockholm Syndrome describes the ideological support and affection that hostages have been known to develop for their captors. It was named for the reactions of employees taken hostage by two ex-convicts during an attempted bank robbery in Sweden in 1973. During captivity, the hostages came to identify with their captor's cause and resisted efforts to be rescued. Affectional bonds also developed. After being freed by police, 2 hostages eventually became engaged to their captors. Patty Hearst experienced a similar transformation of ideology, affection, and identity after being kidnapped, terrorized, and held hostage by the Symbionese Liberation Army in the 1970s. More recently, an American kidnapping victim taken hostage by Muslim rebels in the Philippines seemed to suffer a similar psychological fate. He was described as having fallen for his captors, and when Arbak et Allah simulated a highly stressful captivity situation in which airline employees were taken hostage by terrorists, liking for the terrorist increased over time. Related psychological processes presumably explain why abused spouses and children often prefer to stay with rather than leave their abusers. Just leave. It's that easy. Just leave. You've heard that before. Why are they still there? They just leave. Just go. Just leave. No, because people who abuse know what they're doing. That is a learned behavior on their end. They probably learned it from their father or mother or whomever, from a family member. And back in the 80s, I remember when they had this whole campaign to stop the abuse, stop the cycle of abuse. And it's a real thing. It is a cycle of abuse. It's a cycle. It's a psychological, emotional means of entrapping people into a cycle of abuse. It's a real thing. It's not that easy as just to walk away. It takes professionals and it takes educational establishments to be aware, especially when they're getting that free government money. When maltreatment is connected to involvement with a defined group, the social dependency it fuels may be manifested cognitively, emotionally, and behaviorally. Cognitively and emotionally, the need to maintain and defend the sense of self in the face of the threat and uncertainty can be remedied by transforming an individuated identity into a group identity. And that's what Dr. Bricado was saying, Gary, about how people become so entwined in whatever group they're in or whatever relationship they're in that once you change it or alternate it, they are not able to handle themselves. And that's done with in political ways, fraternities, sororities, Greek life. That whole they become so entwined with that ideology that they have lost themselves as a person. Behaviorally, the dependency fostered by maltreatment is likely to be expressed as compliance with group norms and attraction to group members. We tested whether social dependency in the wake of relatively severe initiations was manifested in these ways by assessing group and individuated identity and by tracking conformity and attraction to groups. Identity was assessed among the members of campus groups with varying initiation practices. Conformity and attraction to the groups was measured in laboratory experiments that simulated mild or severe inductions to contrived groups. Identity. 2 ratings of membership's importance were construed as measures of identity. Following Either and Do, our first measure tapped group identity by asking participants to rate the importance of the group to them. Our second, relatively novel measure of individuality, identity, invited participants to rate individuated. I've been saying that wrong. Identity invited participants to rate their own importance to the group. Identity, therefore, had dual, self-related aspects. How much the individual was psychologically invested in group and belonging to the group, and B, how much the individual perceived the group to invest in his or her unique individuated belonging. The distress-provoking aspects of initiations were expected to augment ratings of the importance of group membership by the individual as individuals sought refuge from threatening circumstances in the psychological safe house of group belonging. Threatening conditions were not, however, expected to make individuals feel more important to the group. If anything, there was reason to believe that being subjected to severe initiation procedures was likely to diminish rather than increase initiants' sense of individuated power and importance relative to the group. For the members of campus groups we surveyed, our specific predictions was that those who rated group initiations as severe would also rate the group's importance to them as greater than would individuals belonging to groups with less severe initiation practices. In contrast, members' perceptions of their individuated importance to the group were not expected to relate to severe treatment. Conformity. Because the behavioral expression of social dependency, conformity, was difficult to measure in the field, we resorted to experimental simulations of initiation protocols to test whether harsh treatment evoked compliance. There is some behavioral evidence from laboratory studies that has linked social dependency in the form of compliance or conformity to experimental induced discomfort. For example, harsh treatment in the form of public failure was found to increase social compliance. Studies of initiation severity per se rarely test for social dependency, although when Shapler and Baitens did, they found that severe inductions increased initiants' dependency on the opinion of the experimenter. These researchers argued that the severe initiation generated dependency by establishing in the perceptions of initiants, the experimenter's power over them. Consistent with Schlapper and Batenson, we predicted that the social dependency engendered by relatively severe treatment would be manifested in high rates of conformity to group opinion. Like a handler type thing, a handler type situation. Effective social bonds. According to attachment theory, discomfort readies the emotional system to seek protection by establishing effective bonds with potential caregivers. When the sources of abuse are the only available outlet, affiliative responses may be directed toward them. Thus, another possible outcome of severe initiations is the development of interpersonal attraction toward its agents. This hypothesis was tested in 2 laboratory experiments in which Confederates staged either discomforting or innocuous initiations. Discomforting initiations were predicted to enhance the attractiveness of Confederates in the eyes of the participants' initiatees. In Study 3, we tracked 2 additional measures of attachment, proximity maintenance and separation anxiety, and predicted that inductees who experienced a relatively severe induction would maintain close physical distance to Confederates and experience heightened anxiety when Confederates left them alone. Cognitive dissonance and alternative mechanism. The standard social psychological explanation for why we come to value the group we suffer for, and the greater the suffering, the greater the value, is dissonance theory. Theoretically, harsh initiations arouse dissonance in individuals who engage in activities that violate conceptions of the self. The more voluntary the engagement, the greater the dissonance aroused, and the more motivation there is to resolve it. Dissonance is mitigated by either cognitively diminishing the negative aspects of initiation activities, such as, it wasn't degrading, it was fun. Overvaluing the group, such as, belonging to this group is so worthwhile that it is worth suffering in order to become part of it, or both. Thus, the mechanism underlying the connection between severe initiations and enhanced evaluation of the group is ostensibly dissonance reduction. Support for the idea that relatively threatening or severe initiations make groups more valuable to newcomers comes from a few classic laboratory experiments conducted in the 1950s and 1960s. These early studies essentially found that the greater the mental or physical effort required for group membership was, the more inflated ratings of group attractiveness became. For instance, participants in Arson and Mills' 1959 study who underwent an embarrassing induction found fellow group members to be more attractive than did participants who experienced a mild induction. Similarly, participants given relatively intense electrical shock during induction exhibited greater liking for their group than did those who received mild shock. These early studies were consistent with the notion that newcomers reduce dissonance by overvaluing the group for which they suffered. Jeez Louise. Sounds a bit like, for some people, like America. Unfortunately, gosh. Discrepancies among previous studies of initiations. Both attachment theory and dissonance theory offer psychological mechanisms that purport to explain the connection between severe initiation practices and group attraction. Yet, later studies have failed to support the basic idea that severe initiations produce greater liking for the group. In the laboratory of 1991, manipulated the severity of induction and reported that mild rather than severe procedures heightened inductees' attraction to the group. Field studies also cast doubt on the link between suffering and liking. They surveyed some newcomers to Dutch sororities and found no evidence that severe inductions provoked either strong group affiliations or heightened group attraction. Specifically, the Dutch sorority pledges who assessed initiation experiences as unpleasant reported feelings of frustration, loneliness, and depression, as well as diminished affiliation with the group. In a recent refinement of this analysis, they reached out a similar conclusion by finding no evidence of dissonance effects. Thus, formal evidence of hazing effects on social emotional bonds is quite mixed. It appears that harsh treatment does not reliably produce the kind of attraction to groups that some research seekers to construe as evidence of dissonance reduction, or that we suggest may be a manifestation of maltreatment effects. Okay, so what I get here is this. The reason why a possible rationale of why it is not effective in the Dutch sorority because of what their culture is underlying, their underlying culture. If their underlying culture is not like what our culture is, which is, my scientific name is hot mess. Our culture is a fucking hot mess. Then the more of a hot mess you are to people that, and they get through it, they feel like they've conquered something. But if Dutch culture, that is not a hot mess, and you start treating them like they're garbage, well, they have the natural reaction of feeling, what was it? Unpleasant. They felt frustrated, lonely, and depressed because they're not normally treated that way at their home or within their culture of whatever town they're from or city they're from. So when you start treating them like that, their natural response is going to be frustration, loneliness, and depression. But when you come from a space of a hot mess and vile, corrupt behavior, well, when that happens and you get through that horrible, even more abusive treatment, you feel like you've won in life. You see how ridiculous that sounds? You know how insane that sounds? I keep going back to Anne and Dr. Bricado. How you see how our universities are and how these fraternities and sororities are and how these massacres happen, that shows you how our culture is as a society as a whole. It's a reflection of our society, not just Greek and not just the university, but as a whole. And because of that, those three girls and Kaylee, Maddie, and Zan, let me pay respects, and Ethan, they were human beings, is what I've said before. Beautiful human beings, inside and out. And they were like, what the fuck is this shit? And got out of it. And they literally got massacred for it. And then they're surrounded by people who want to keep that corruption going and that abuse going and that psychological, emotional abuse going. So they did the right thing of getting out. And I'm tired of seeing people who are doing the right thing get massacred. We protect the corrupt and kill the innocent. That's what we are right now. This is what we are as a country. We're number one. We're number one. Limitations of previous research. Irrespective of theoretical orientation, measurement and design problems may account for discrepancies among the findings of laboratory experiments, field studies, anecdotal reports, and case studies of the effects of initiations. Laboratory experiments typically impose short-term inductions designed to invoke specific psychological threats such as social embarrassment, fear of shock, or anxiety produced by performing a repetitive task. What laboratory participants placed in minimal groups experience is short-lived and variously defined: embarrassment, fear of, pain, boredom. Meanwhile, initiates of real-world groups experience something very different. Absolutely. Anecdotal reports and case studies suggest that real-world initiation activities arouse a confluence of feelings. Activities may comprise aspects that are fun, embarrassing, disgusting, boring, painful, brutal, and challenging. Unfortunately, researchers in the field typically measure real-world hazing by packaging these experiences together and measuring them as a single construct, which you cannot do. For example, in 1997, they measured severity of initiation experiences on scales for unpleasantness. Studies indexing initiations with a single scale constrained the complexity of initiations and initiative reactions into a unitary response. We gathered multiple assessments of initiation experiences and submitted them to a multiple regression analysis in order to distinguish among them. The present research, we unpacked initiations and their consequences for individuals and groups on college campuses from a functional perspective. In the field, we assessed whether initiation practices related to the development of group-relevant attitudes and skills, to the reinforcement of group hierarchy, and to group identity. In the laboratory, we tested whether relatively severe induction spawned conformity and attraction to group members as a manifestation of the social dependency generated by maltreatment. In study 1, we asked students belonging to campus organizations, typically sororities, fraternities, athletic teams, and clubs, and a cappella group. Now, I gotta look this up. A cappella group, like the a cappella, like the singing groups. I mean, if a cappella groups are getting crazy with the initiation fee, we're doomed. A cappella. That's what it is. Well, I'll be damned. And a cappella groups. A cappella. A cappella music is performed by a singer or a singing group without instrumental accompaniment, or a piece intended to be performed in this fashion. The term a was originally intended to differentiate between Renaissance polyphony and Baroque concerto musical styles. Well, if a cappella groups are getting crazy with the initiates to be part of their group, that is insane. You're supposed to make beautiful, sweet harmonies. But in order to get it, you have to be mentally and physically abused. That's not how it works. There's that whole myth that in order for you to be an amazing artist or an amazing musician, that you have to do drugs and go through all this torture and torment to be a true artist, which is not true. That's a myth that people put out there for whatever reason. I mean, the fact that you have to be so unbalanced to make beautiful, balanced art. That dichotomy is written on paper. It's not a humane thing. Yeah, certain things have come out of, chaos, as they like wars and abuse or whatever that they were personally in, that was out of their control, that just happened spontaneously, that they were a victim of. Yes, that they use art as a way to heal themselves. That's one thing. But when you are purposefully doing it or trying to create it so that you can get something out of it, that is man-made, and that's not a universal law that works. That is a man-made law. That's a rule of man law that's not effective, and it needs to be known that it's not true. Let's see. To retrospectively assess their impressions of activities designed to initiate or test new members. Members rated the degree to which these activities were fun, embarrassing, physically and psychologically challenging, socially deviant or abnormal, and painful. Members also responded to rating scales assessing the relatively power of group leaders over new members. Measures of group and individuated identity were taken. Participants rated how important the group was to them and how importantly they were to the group, respectively. In studies 2 and 3, experimental Confederates served as group members who inducted naive participants into their group using either discomforting or innocuous procedures. Social dependence was measured by assessing participants' conformity to Confederates' opinions and by having them rate the attractiveness of Confederates and the enjoyment of the experience. In study 3, affiliative bonds were indexed by the proximity participants maintained with Confederates and by the anxiety they reported when Confederates left them alone, consistent with the thinking of Bowlby. Gender was likely to add complexity to relationships involving power. Male and female attitudes towards social dominance typically differ, and the nature of power structures in male and female groups reflects these differences. Power relationships among males are maintained and supported by overt aggression and are characterized by well-defined hierarchies. Power bonds among females emerge from subtle and direct relational forms of aggression and coincide with less obvious hierarchical dominant structures. From early to late in life, male relationships typically promote status distinction, whereas female relationships generally project status diffusions. Thus, our sample included only individuals initiated into same-gender organizations, and gender of participants was incorporated as a variable. All right, so they went ahead and they go over the limitations. And here's the methods. So let's see. Initial pool of 156 male and 166 females. All were enrolled in a small, highly selective liberal arts college in the Northeast. They ranged from ages from 18 to 22. And because they participated, they got a free slice of pizza, except for 39 participants who earned a introductory psychological laboratory credit in lieu of the coupon. Well, I would have done that. 92% of the men and 87% of the women who participated reported membership in a single gender organization as their primary affiliation. Data from these participants formed the basis of all analysis. Therefore, our final sample included 138 men and 131 women who indicated a same gender group as their most important campus membership. So the materials, they fill out information about, if they participated in their first academic year as male or female. On the second page, they checked off what they were affiliated with. They had printed instructions on who they identified the most, like which group they identified the most with, such as a club, sport team, student newspaper, an a cappella group, sorority, student government, pep band, varsity sports team, religious organization, fraternity, or other. And then the questions appeared in a standard order. Question 1. Did you participate in initiation activities? Never, rarely, occasionally, frequently, or often. And then the next 6 questions assessed psychological challenging, how embarrassing, how physically demanding, how much fun, how painful, and how deviant. Defined as not normal, strange. The activities were and presented 7-point response scales labeled not at all, somewhat, and extremely. The next subsequent set of questions asked about the existence of officers and their power over members. The first query in this cluster was, is there a president, captain, or group leader? Yes or no? And how much power does that president, captain, or group leader have over other members of the group? No power, some power, lots of power. Then the procedure. They read a consent form stating that they were studying student perceptions of the campus organizations in which they were involved in. Students were informed that participation was voluntary. Ooh. That's something new that I just learned. Experimenters maintained an appropriate distance from participants as they completed the survey. And let's see. As part of the pilot study, participants were given the option of completing the 10-item need to belong scale. After completing our survey, approximately 74% of participants completed the scale. When finished with their chosen task, participants were thanked, debriefed, and given a coupon redeeming their free slice of pizza. So the results and discussions. Descriptions of the sample. Table 1 contains descriptive statistics for male and female undergrad participants who reported membership in same-gender organizations. Men and women were generally similar distributed in terms of class year and organizational affiliations. Most identified either athletic clubs or teams or Greek letter organizations as the primary group to which they belonged. The size of the groups men and women belonged to averaged between 26 and 50 members. In these ways, males and female participants were comparable. However, male juniors were relatively underrepresented. More men than women were associated with a cappella groups. More women than men identified with athletic groups. Initiation tactics of athletic and Greek letter groups. To test the hypothesis that different groups rely on different initiation tactics in order to reinforce group-relevant attitudes and skills, we sorted participants into 2 distinct memberships, varsity and club athletics and Greek letter. Members of the a cappella groups were omitted from these analyses. I can't get over that. Predictions were that members of athletic groups would report relatively greater degrees of physical challenge and pain as part of which that makes sense. That makes sense to me. The members of Greek letter organizations would report relatively greater degrees of embarrassment and deviance during initiations. Group memberships and gender were the independent variables, with perceptions of degree of physical challenge, pain, psychological challenge, embarrassment, and deviance entailed in initiations as dependent variables. Very good, very good. All right. So they're getting more into the statistic time. We'll go over that, or we will not be going over that. We'll go over the conclusion. So there's the method, the results, and discussion. Conformity. To measure conformity, we calculated the absolute difference between the average ratings of the Confederates and that of the participants for each of the 5 critical trials in which the 2 Confederates gave uniformly biased ratings. These differences were added to form discrepancy scores. Thus, conformists gave ratings that were least discrepant from the biased ratings of Confederates. To test whether severe treatment induced conformity, we compared discrepancy scores from each induction condition using a one-way analysis of variance, an ANOVA. As predicted, men who experienced the discomforting initiation conformed most by producing discrepancy scores that strayed least from the biased judgments of Confederates. social emotional bonds to test predictions that discomforting initiations would elevate ratings of the group's attractiveness and increase the perceived enjoyment of the experiment. We computed a multivariate analysis of variance, the MANOVA, comparing induction conditions, innocuous versus discomforting, across ratings of the Confederates' poise, congeniality, and power, and ratings of how much fun and embarrassment participants experienced. The overall main effect for induction was significant, with the p-value of less than 0.05. Table 6 depicts the univariate means differences on which this result was based. The univariate test indicated that participants who received the discomforting induction perceived Confederates as more powerful and as marginally friendlier than did those who received the innocuous induction. Participants who experienced the discomforting induction also tended to report having had more fun than did those inducted via innocuous procedures. Induction did not significantly alter perceptions of the Confederates' poise or of inductees' perceived embarrassment by the end of the experiment. Whew. So that sounds like, to me, like a defense mechanism that their body naturally does in order to continue. Like the cognitive dissonance is what they're saying, in order to continue living life under these circumstances, your natural reaction is a defense mechanism to kind of disassociate a little, so to speak, so that it's not as bad as it was. Oh, it actually wasn't that bad. It was actually kind of fun. Kind of that whole mentality, which these groups are using, which is very, very scary. The correlations presented in Table 7 indicate that discrepancy scores were significantly associated only with the men's perceptions of the Confederates' power. The greater the degree of power attributed to inductors was, the less men's opinions differed from them. Did perceptions mediate the effect of treatment condition on conformity? We performed separate meditation analysis on ratings of Confederates, power, poise, congeniality. In the experiment, fun, embarrassing, beta for the condition discrepancy relationship was negative 0.39, with a p-value of less than 0.01. Only power revealed a mediating role, and it was weak. Specifically, Confederates were perceived to be more powerful by men in the discomforting than in the innocuous conditions, and these perceptions were associated with lower discrepancy scores. But partialing power from the equation reduced the condition discrepancy relationship only slightly, suggesting that perceptions of Confederates' power only partly accounted for the effect of initiation conditions on discrepancy conformity scores. Summary. Consistent with a dependency interpretation, severe treatment produced inductees who yielded most to conformity pressure from the group. In addition, men who experience a psychologically discomforting induction before joining a group tended to rate its members as more powerful and friendlier, and reported having had more fun than did men exposed to innocuous induction. In sum, by orchestrating a discomforting induction routine, we elevated men's dependence on and attraction to the agents who inducted them. Perceptions of the group's power rather than aspects of their attractiveness predicted compliance. However, the uniformly attractive demeanor of our charismatic group may have masked the effects of attractiveness of the group. In Study 3, we vary the attractiveness of the group. We also refined our design by inviting qualified participants to choose whether they wish to join the group. This modification made the process more closely resemble real-world fraternity and sorority rushing. In Study 3, Female undergrad students were initiated by feeling and smelling either unpleasant or innocuous objects while blindfolded. Following induction, they joined upper-class students, Confederates, who pressured them to conform. Confederates either behaved in a warm, friendly, attractive fashion or manifested a cool, formal, less appealing demeanor. Ratings of the Confederates and the experience were collected from inductees. In addition, self-reports of negative and positive feelings were gathered, and we surreptitiously measured the proximity inductees maintained Confederates as indicative of social bonds. Consistent with maltreatment effects, a relatively severe induction was predicted to promote dependency in the form of greater conformity and closer proximity to Confederates. Whether or not their demeanor was attractive, social bonds are characterized by anxiety in response to separation. Thus, negative arousal was expected to intensify when Confederates left severely initiated inductees alone. Woo! There you go. So this is definitely done purposefully. They know it works and they know how effective it is. And that's why they do what they do. It's a psychological warfare. So here is study 3. I'm going to put this in my description so you can read the rest on your own, because it is really good, but it's over an hour right now. And let's just do the general discussion. Okay. We set out to unpack initiations and their consequences for individual relationships with groups on college campuses from a functional perspective. In the field, we assessed whether initiation practices related to the development of group-relevant attitudes and skills, to the reinforcement of group hierarchy, and to group identity. In the laboratory, we tested whether relatively severe induction spawned conformity and attraction to group members as manifestations of social dependency. The results across studies suggested that hazing functions to preserve group features and promote cognitive, social, and emotional manifestations of social dependency. The premise that initiation activities function to preserve group-relevant skills and attitudes was largely confirmed. For example, the initiation practices of groups with different missions varied as predicted. The success of athletic teams depends on the physical endurance of its members. The success of Greek letter organization requires the establishment of an exclusive social network, a goal well served by emphasizing the uniqueness of group membership and its social distinctiveness from out groups. Consistent with this thinking, athletes characterize their initiation activities as physically challenging and painful, whereas members of Greek letter organizations highlighted the role of social deviance in initiation activities. Taken together, the implication is that initiations functions as a training group for group-relevant skills and attitudes. However, studies that include a wider array of organizations, missions, and hierarchies are needed for confirmation. Projections about the functional fit between hierarchy and initiation severity met with mixed success. The psychological techniques of social control manifested in initiations were predicted to be especially severe and frequent in groups characterized by clear power differences between leaders and members and elaborated role diversity. To preserve these features of hierarchy, groups were expected to sponsor initiants that effectively tuned initiants' responses to them. As predicted, initiations requiring new members to engage in social deviance were linked to enhanced perceptions of the relatively power of leaders over new members and to role diversity. In addition, more frequent engagement in initiation activities was associated with greater role diversity as predicted. Yet, our second measure of hierarchy, power differentials, failed to predict more frequent engagement in initiation activities. Moreover, initiations typified by harsh treatment, as distinct from social deviance, were associated with diminished, instead of increased, differentials for each index of hierarchy. Rather than undermining group members' sense of power, harsh treatment requiring initiates to prevail under physical and psychological duress actually seemed to empower them by diminishing perceptions of in-group power differentials. We hypothesize that the overarching function of all types of severe treatment during initiation was to enhance dependency on the group, expressed cognitively, socially, and emotionally. Consistent with this idea, how much personal importance individuals ascribed to the group they identified with most was predicted not only by how much fun participants had during initiations, but also by how harsh initiation activities were perceived to be. The combined independent effects of these disparate experiences, fun and harsh treatment, perhaps provide a human parallel to the social emotional impact of the nurturing and punishment treatments Fisher dispensed to puppies and Harlow delivered to monkeys in order to prime social dependency. If social identity is a social cognitive consequence of social dependency, then these results are compatible with the dependency explanation of maltreatment effects. The results from 2 laboratory studies also supported the social dependency interpretation. The male and female undergrad participants who experienced a discomforting induction showed heightened dependence on the opinions of group members. Whether or not group members were viewed as particularly attractive, relatively severe treatment increased vulnerability to group influence relative to mild induction. We construed conformity as a form of dependence and a manifestation of maltreatment effects. Measurement of more traditional attachment behaviors augmented these results. Women who experienced harsh treatment maintained close proximity to Confederates and experienced negative effects after Confederates left. In a sense, our laboratory tests simulated the strange situation for adults, and induction procedures elicit social bonds with its agents. To us, the pattern results across studies seems tailored to a social dependency interpretation. The fact that harsh treatment was associated with a heightened personal stake in group membership could be construed as a social cognitive manifestation of maltreatment effects in a form of social dependency. Similarly, conformity and group attraction were used to index behavioral, social, and emotional components of dependency in the wake of maltreatment effects. Such effects are normally applied to individual attachments, but are used here to explain social bonds between individuals and groups. Some may be bothered by this leap in levels of conceptual analysis and feel unready to bridge theoretical approaches to interpersonal affectional bonds, group attachments, and social identity. Others, however, have welcomed attempts at a synthesis. Have all made cogent arguments for a distillation of the basic brew of motives and proclivities that fuel human social bonds across contexts and lifetimes. The integrative story of maltreatment effects in social bonds may go like this. Maltreatment generates uncertainty, emotional extremes, and stress, which elicit affectional and affiliative behavior toward individuals or groups that is normally adaptive. The social emotional bonds that result increase vulnerability to social influence and indoctrination and foster a depersonalized social identity. At the same time, maltreatment signals differential power. The depersonalized individual's dependence on the group is not matched by any dependency the group has. All right, let's try that again. Maltreatment generates uncertainty, emotional extremes, and stress, which elicit affectional and affiliative behavior toward individuals or groups that is normally adaptive. Makes sense. The social emotional bonds that result increased vulnerability to social influence and indoctrination and foster a depersonalized social identity. At the same time, maltreatment signals differential power. Correct? The depersonalized individual's dependence on the group is not matched by any dependence that group has on individuals. This interrogation suggests that harsh initiations would enhance perceptions of the importance of the group to the individual, but not necessarily heighten members' feelings of their individuated importance to the group. Our studies are largely consistent with this telling and support a social dependency interpretation of initiations. So this makes sense why in sororities they have the big and the little. And then you have the grandma and then the great grandma, because that way they are able to be more involved and be more entranced with the group because they are identified with an individual or certain small individuals within the group. That makes total sense. And that's why they do that, big and little. They have that whole hierarchy set up so that you stay within the group, which is sick and twisted in my mind, in my humble opinion, in my maybe biased opinion. But I do not support any type of group or groups where people die for the greater group. I mean, that's insane to me. Call me a hippie, but that is insane. All right. So definitely more studies need to be done on this. As this had mentioned, it needs to be a little bit more looked into. Definitely when people don't want to integrate the functionality of the attachment theory with this. If you look at the human aspect of it, which is what this research paper has done, it makes a lot more sense of why when Kaylee got back, or why him and Hod are going there in the first place, because she was out of the sorority and goes to a sorority party, the Betty Ball, which there's still that underlying psychological abuse going on and that attachment. And, she was in her senior year, so she's had some years within that sorority. It's going to take some years to come off of that, which is natural. They say even with just like if you gain weight and when you lose weight, it took you a while to gain that weight, so therefore it's going to take you a while to unlose that. Same thing if you're in a relationship of any sort. You're together for so many months or years, it's going to take so much time for you to come to be detached to that relationship because it's natural binding, a natural bond that we have. So you just have to be aware of the who and the why and the how of when you're looking at this case with these sorority, ex-sorority members. The sorority girls are playing a role in their mind that they think is natural, and they think it's needed, and they think that it's okay, when technically it is not. And that type of behavior is protected and fostered within the university. And that's why it escalated to the point that it is, which makes more sense of why they wanted it to be an outside person named Brian Koberger, who came from Pennsylvania, that somehow managed to get his life back together. And maybe he saw something wrong within the system that he went through, and he wanted to either make people more aware of it or maybe somehow be an advocate of some sorts, because he went into the point where he became a PhD student, which he had to teach. So people who go into, like, I am a medical professional, I have my license. I didn't become one so I can learn how to kill people with medicine. Are you fucking kidding me? How insane that sounds. People come into fields because they want to naturally help people. I didn't get my master's in criminal justice, victimology, so I can be a better pimp or become a huge trafficker. Like, no, you go to school to learn and to gain knowledge. And yes, there are people out there that do gain knowledge for nefarious reasons, but he showed no signs of that at all. He seemed to have somewhat of a social life. To tell you the truth, he has more of a social life than I do at 28. I got my papers and I do my little athletics and I do my little crocheting. I go to work and I do my due diligence of being, I'm in a social atmosphere where I have to, play by the rules just to make sure like things run kosher, and do my job. But he seemed to have somewhat of a social life, and he went to a book reading. That's more than I would do. Now, I say how much I do enjoy Ann Burgess and Gary Baccato. If they did like a book reading in my area, it would depend on where it is, the time, and what restaurants were around it. In order for me to go, there would be a lot of variables for me to go out and do that. Even I used to love going to concerts, the same thing. And there's a lot of variables that entail in order for me to go out and do something, which I think is natural for when you get older. That does happen. He's in his 20s, almost getting to his 30s. And I feel at that time as you're starting to rev down your socialness a little bit more, but he seemed to be still in the social game of things. So, as we compiled this research, hazing at a nearby college campus ended in the death of a young man who expired after engaging in a tradition of ingesting large quantities of water through a funnel. Hey, look at that. I wonder if it's the same one that I had brought up in that video, or it could be a different one. I don't know if he did it through a funnel, though. This is 2003, so no, it's not. But there's other ones, obviously, that are like that. On the eve before his death, pledges would have undoubtedly described their initiation activities as deviant but fun, their leader as powerful, and the feeling of belonging to the group as an important source of their identity. That's what Dr. Baccato was saying. What would it have taken for any one of them to change his mind? Misplaced human social attachments fit the cross-species pattern of behavior spawned by maltreatment effects. Treatment that incorporates elements of punishment can enhance outward signs of attachment towards abusive figures. Supporting the motivation to bond are proximate psychological benefits reaped by organisms drawn to those who typically support and protect them, as well as underlying evolutionary forces responsible for human sociability. Maltreatment effects may explain why abused children remain attached to abusive parents, why battered wives endured relationships with brutal spouses, and why hostages develop emotional attachments to their captors. Charismatic groups, and perhaps at some level, more ordinary groups, cultivate this same kind of devotion by serving both as agents of abuse and as anchors of attachment. So there you go. It kind of folded in nicely. It said a lot, pretty much what's going on with the Idaho 4, with any type of hazing that's gone through in the fraternity and sorority. And also it gives you a little insight of how these cult religious groups happen, like Scientology, even Christianity, Catholicism, how there is some type of abuse that is formed. There's like one central figure that's there up in front, given whatever type of information. And definitely how abuse of psychological type abuse is definitely used as a way of an attachment to these organizations, and how dangerous it can be, how people go through a lot just to be a part of it, even though deep down inside they know it's not right, but they still go through with it. And this is definitely known, it's definitely fostered, and I understand if there's groups these groups are initially done to help communities. Same things as churches were too. I see less church help and less community help from these Greek organizations. So therefore, they've lost their way, so to speak, with that, and maybe they need a need for that to go back to their roots in that manner. But was it really that in the first place? Is what you really have to ask yourself. So there you go. That's it. Thank you very much for coming to this channel. I appreciate you very much. Thank you for sticking with me thus far with this, especially with this one. This one was a tough one for some people, even myself, to see how insidious it is. I keep using that word throughout, but it is. It's a very insidious system that we're in, that and that corruption is also fostered that way as well. And sometimes things have to get worse before they can get better. And not only that, change is not fun, but it is good. And sometimes a slow progression is better than a fast anecdotal variable brought in to help with things to change. That's not always going to be helpful. You do need some tradition, but you also need some changes in order for moments like this and other victims' lives are not taken for a group, for a sorority, or for a fraternity. And I believe there's other aspects involved with that as well. Definitely, I'm sure drugs were involved. And I have a feeling, yes, drugs are involved. They were on campus. And I'm sure the officers were aware. The university was aware. The community was aware. Everyone was aware. So when you are in a social situation like that where everyone's aware, it's hard to see what is right and what is wrong, especially when it becomes socially acceptable for that type of behavior. And the amount we saw in my other video of the amount of sex offenders that are in Moscow, Idaho, is alarming as well. To have that many sex offenders within all those female students as well as male students is very concerning. And the whole time, all they cared about was noise complaints. So that's it for this. I am definitely going to do the gang stalking next. It'll take me a few days to do that. And I have a little treat coming up. I'm going to try some photoshopping. It's just fun. It's me being a little fun with this whole thing. Kind of just keep me anchored in here and just kind of be silly a little bit. And sometimes you have to understand the people you're dealing with. And I feel like this will just give some of us a little giggle, a little chuckle about it. Maybe not them so much, but sometimes humility is important for all of us so that we can stay grounded. So let me know in the comments how you felt about this. I love all your comments. I appreciate them. And until next time, this is Ra's Night, and let's squeeze that quo.